AI is moving faster than organizations can govern it. Chip Block joins All About Risk to discuss trust, governance, outdated control frameworks, and why risk can no longer be managed through checklists alone.
Every business has risk. The real challenge is keeping up with it. That's where C1 Risk makes a difference. It's an all-in-one platform that brings governance, risk, and compliance together in one place. You can automate tasks, monitor and mitigate risks in real time, and tap into more than 200 compliance frameworks with intelligent control mapping. And because it integrates seamlessly with the tools companies already use, it helps reduce cost, improve efficiency, and keep teams focused on what matters most. To learn more or request a free demo, go to c1risk.com.
Welcome to All About Risk. Today we're joined by Chip Block, a technologist and risk leader with more than 3 decades of experience across government, healthcare, and cybersecurity. He has built companies, led complex initiatives, and helped organizations navigate real risk. What began as a discussion about AI threats quickly became a deeper conversation on how AI is reshaping cybersecurity, governance, and business operations. Hi, Chip. Thank you so much for joining us at All About Risk. We're incredibly privileged to have you here. Why don't you give our audience a little background about you and what you're up to?
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Lily. My name's Chip Block. I'm the CEO and Chief Technologist at Kiwi Futures. I have been in the technology business since pretty much the beginning of the technology business, over 40 years, and have been working in a number of markets, particularly in the advanced technology space. Over the last year and a half, I actually started a company focused on where AI and quantum are going and how that impacts everything from business to risk to trust to all of those factors, and kind of looking at all of those things together. And I'm currently working with a number of clients on uh, not only implementing technologies, but looking at strategies and things of that sort.
What you just said really, from my perspective, don't put things in justice in terms of like all the amazing projects you've been involved in. Just a couple of like highlights in terms of the impact that you've had in the past. Like, is there anything that you can mention so that we can think about like how you help shaped risk quantification and some of the other stuff that you've done?
I have been very fortunate to work on some really cool stuff. Of course, I also tell people they say, "Well, how did you pick the job you did?" I said, "If you don't start off with, hey, that sounds like cool, then you shouldn't do it. It's cool." I do have what's called an R&D 100 award, which was I was the co-principal investigator for one of the 100 most significant technologies in the world. That was actually what turned out to be might have been one of the first IoT devices ever, and I did that with a national lab, Pacific Northwest National Lab. I was one of the first people involved in their about risk in the movement of cyber risk quantification, and that came about because when we went from uh, cybersecurity being just a tech thing in the back room and a risk thing, I did a research project and wrote a paper called "And Then the Accountant Showed Up: Why the Insurance Industry Will Drive Cyber Technology," and it became I got a little notice for that and got very involved in the intersection of in the insurance world and the cyber world. So I've been fortunate to been involved in a number of kind of the where the world's going. Now, I'm very focused on the next big turn, which is particularly artificial intelligence.
I think from our relationship, one thing that I can truly rely on is having you as my expert mentor on the latest technology and the most advanced threat. So let's talk about the latest. Is it quantum? Is it AI? What have you been tinkering in, and what latest paper have you been working on?
Yeah, so I've written a couple papers, done research and done papers on a couple different topics. One of them, which went back a couple years ago, about why the cybersecurity community just wasn't getting AI. As AI was coming around, there were some fundamental things that we do in cybersecurity that were going to get broke. And by the way, everything that I kind of talked about has now happened. So that was one of them. And then the other uh, factor, and the thing I've really been working on a lot, is the how business models, right? So I'm kind of talking to everybody here, both technologists and business people, um, how business models change what we've done. And this is because of the experience of watching as the internet grew and the cyber world got worse and worse. It was driven by business considerations, not really. Everybody thinks it's a technology problem, it's a business problem. I actually, about papers, I wrote a paper 2018 of why the next cyber czar should be an economist, right? And it was because if you wanted to change cybersecurity, you needed to change the economics of it. It is interesting that the most recent cyber strategy from the White House actually starts off with that assumption, right? We need to start imposing costs on attackers. So now I'm looking at that same type of thought process related to AI and cyber in particular.
I think this is so relevant because when we think about why we even need technology is because it's driven by the business, it's by the user of how they're using technology and what technology needs to be created for them and how we need to protect it is the cybersecurity piece. But it almost seems like in cybersecurity, we're always behind. It was the user that drove SaaS application and being managed out of the CIO office. It is the user who is now going to quickly adopt how they use AI beyond any IT department. And now we're going to have to reactively learn how to manage it, protect it, and all that good stuff. So, as far as cybersecurity team not being ready to manage and protect the AI world and usage, like let's talk about a little bit about the nature of AI and how that's changing the game.
Yeah, so if you actually look at how cybersecurity has been structured, and we still even use the same terms. Cybersecurity has always had this picture of a bunch of servers in my basement and a bunch of desktops on people's desk, and I'm protecting that. And as you did point out, the world changed dramatically. We're on our phones and everything else, and we still got to have this view. Well, there's really three things around cybersecurity, CISSP 101 things, which is I'm protecting assets, I'm protecting IP addresses, I'm protecting networks, right? Well, the other piece about that is I'm looking for anomalous patterns in things, right? I'm looking for things that are acting different. That's how we built our cyber world. In the AI world, none of those apply anymore. So, as an example, if anybody's used AI, you use ChatGPT or whatever, if you ask it the same question twice, you might get two different answers. That's because AI is a probabilistic engine. It's giving you probable answers, it's not deterministic. It's not going to give you the same thing every time. So now think of the cyber world where we're now dealing with environments that are different. There is no pattern, so there's no anomaly defined, right? The next thing think about this is software, right? One of the keys is we are looking for signatures in software, but now you can build incredible software in minutes, not months. But back to the businesses are now going to be building software in minutes, right? So we can't use the same thing. You can't say, oh, I'm going to build a new software program in 10 minutes, but I need a 3-week test cycle to make sure it's secure. That doesn't work, right? That takes the, the value goes out of it. So those are all business business drivers that are going to make cybersecurity completely different than what we're used to.
Absolutely. You just talked about where things are moving. And the entire time, all I can think about is in the GRC world, risk and compliance and all these framework and all these different control family from asset management to configuration management to how we manage vulnerability. It is all going to be disrupted. All of these objective and controls has to be um, evolved. And in so many decades, we haven't evolved those controls. And we are still auditing for the same type of control, which I think there's going to be a lot of work done on the governance and the control side, and we need a lot of new types of thought leadership in terms of how that's being done. Let's just take asset management, for example. You're no longer going to have control over a lot of infrastructure devices because now all of this is our third party controls, and in many cases they're services, right? They're being powered by this amazing infrastructure of hardware that Jensen Wong and Nvidia talks about, like this $1 trillion revenue business, and it's going to be the entire hardware stack is going to be completely architected differently. And so when it comes to asset management, there may be still a place for device management in terms of your endpoints, but when it comes to the infrastructure, that completely change.
Right.
Same with configuration management and same as SDLC, like you just talked about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all changing really fast and in a completely different direction than we're used to. So one of the research projects and papers I wrote actually starts off with a discussion of my wife's vegan pesto sauce, right? And the reason is I noticed that she came in the kitchen, she had this recipe from ChatGPT, and it, by the way, I don't know if I should admit this, but it actually was a very good recipe. It tasted really good. Um, but what she did not get was any ads, right? There were no ads. But not only that, she got no information on where any of that data came from. In fact, some of it, like she didn't have an ingredient that gave her a new recipe, was derived. There is no direct source of data to her, right? Likewise, there's no IP address, right? So there's no direct asset tracking of data coming from point A to my wife's phone. There is no tracking of that. So back to your controls, there is an assumption in the control structures of, I'm going to call it the fundamental computing environment of physical devices that have software on them that are connected to networks that have data on it, and that you could track that all the way to from point A to point B. In the AI world, that's pretty much gone. With that being gone, how do we now protect it? It really does start coming down to data, less so than assets.
Yes. And the other thing that I have been thinking about is having a data inventory is not enough because with AI, the models and through their way of creating responses is really looking at so much amount of data that is not being inventory or tagged that it actually also create and evolved into new conclusions and new data sets, right? Now, when AI models evolve into a new conclusion, a new data set based on mathematical formulas and stuff, who actually is the data owner and who is actually the data processor of that new piece of information?
That's a absolutely great question because as I just pointed out, we're no longer in this data source, data output traceability. It's creating new data that doesn't exist. And I think we need to start moving in a slightly different thought process. And I had moved in this way. We were talking about quantified risk. I started moving in this direction in some of the risk evaluations that I was doing last couple of years. Instead of asking, what is my environment and what are my risks? Turning the question backwards and saying, what is my business risk and how does my cyber and computing world contribute to those? Not the other way around, right? So so I think we're going to end up that with data too, which is what do I need to run my business? What data is essential to run my business? And where does that data come from? Because it might come from AI, it may not come, but it's almost looking at the problem back, starting with business and turning it to the data, not starting with the data and turning it to the business.
And also, I'm thinking about governance all day long, cases about a subject matter expert using AI research under oath in court cases as expert opinions, and it was being thrown out because it was coming from AI. But I think that like one of the things about data governance is um, to not be so hung up on who created the data, but who is initially using that data that needs to trust that data. How are we capturing the need of certain type of data being used and who's using it? I think that the term data owner can be so broad. And in terms of governance, we really just need to really understand how to manage the data and where's our starting point.
But that's a great point. I think we are going to move into a data validation more so than data source, right? So in the current world, how do I validate data? Well, I got it from this source because it's on this IP address, which came from this website, right? Or whatever the case may be. That's the world we live in now. But now in the new world, where data is constantly being created, changed, modified, et cetera, the question becomes, how do I validate that that data is accurate, right? And that's almost creating an entire new tool sets, entire new thought processes, right? And back to risk, okay, am I if somebody comes in and says, I think that I'm 80% sure this data is correct, based on what you're using it for, you may say that's okay, or let's just think if it's a health decision, right? Are you good enough with making a diagnosis on 80% good enough data, or do you need it to be 95 or 100? On the other hand, if it's, my golf score, ah, I'm okay with 80%, right? And I think we're moving into that way of looking at risk, not
Yeah.
risk like we traditionally have, but actually looking at risk in terms of how much do I trust my data, right?
Yes, yeah. And we all know that organization, the more complex you are, the larger you are, the more people is involved, there is complexity. And that's why I think risk is very difficult to be tracked manually, as you know, my background. But I think that one of the big key and evolving criticality of a function that needs to occur is how do we manage data? How do we do it without having a clean inventory? Where is our process in place to understand governing data? Like what kind of data is being used, regardless of the source? We do need to know the source, but let's just capture what data we need to operate our business. What are the vital records that we absolutely need? Where is it coming from? And how do we validate data in terms of who has the credentials and credibility to tell us the accuracy of these data? I think that these risks conversation, it has to be evolved and be embedded into everybody's roles and every part of the company. It's not just a risk function. I think that risk function is moving more and more into a coordinator role
Mhm.
and setting processes and maybe addressing like um, uh, new threats and issues that maybe has not been embedded into the culture of the company. But we definitely need some type of even an ERP system to manage the governance of data.
Oh, I completely agree. In fact, I would say that we're moving into two. I think there's some technology, one technology discussion and one process discussion. Number one, technology. I think we are quickly moving to a point where we are going to have to be able to secure data independent of the networks and devices it's on. So that's really an encryption type activity, right? I want a file, and this is something Kiwi works, I do a lot of work on. I want to encrypt the file, and I want to make sure that only the people I want to see that file ever see that file, including I can block any AI engine. And it doesn't matter where it is, how it is, whatever. It can be sent by any means, whatever. So that gives me a protection at a file or other or lower level, right? Then you tie into, okay, so who now actually can manage and control that? And this is where I think we're going to get a major shift, which is right now. Access is an IT, it's done by the IT department, right? The through things like the Active Directory, et cetera. They just because they determine who gets data based on who can go to what device, location, whatever. But if the data can be secure independent, that becomes an operational function. I wrote the document. I get to determine who can and cannot see the data, right? Or that this data, back to ownership, is part of this organization. There's somebody operation. They're not IT at all. And they are the business group that says, these are the people I want to see our data, or the AI engines I want to see my engine, or whatever the case may be. That becomes an operational function. So governance, back to your points, moves away from an IT type function and becomes an operational function based around data. And that I absolutely think that well, not only do I think that's where we're going, it's the only way we can go. It's the only thing that actually works.
It's almost like configuration management for data.
Absolutely.
It has to be embedded into your workflow, your business process in the way you use data. And it has to be embedded. You can't backlog that kind of work. It's
Yeah.
absolutely impossible to keep up with.
And the lower the level you could do that, the better. Some people will say, well, I do that now. And they will tell me, how do you do that? So I said, all the stuff is stored in this drive, and I manage who gets in and out of that drive. So you're not managing the data, you're managing that drive, right? You've got, you know, 3 gigs of data, and that you don't know what's in there. You just have this big
Yeah.
pile of stuff, right? And you're controlling who goes in and out. That's not controlling data. Data has to be managed at a lower level.
Yeah, and then I think at some point, like we got to put a date in mind, future date, where there is the capability to actually fully implement these in a more cost-effective way or a humane matter, which I think with AI they can help us get there in like minutes and seconds and not years. And then we also know that all the historical data may not have that information, and we need to treat them as historical data as well, right? I I do want to raise that a lot of controls that we have defined for security no longer can be the key controls moving forward. It has to evolve, right? And even still today, I see that changing control in a company is like so painful.
I would make an argument that if you secure data independent of networking devices, I can cut 500 controls out of NIST 800-53.
That's music to my ear. I don't even think people can use risk and understand how to discuss risk to cut controls out of a framework. I think that these framework should not equal to how many controls you have. That's
Right. I
a key thing that you just said.
so you're aware, that's, and we've kind of mentioned this before. The government's kind of going that route. If you've been following the FedRAMP 20X route, what they're saying is they want you to define your risks and then define the controls that match those risks, right? And that's the direction they're going, and I think overall, that is the path we're going. It isn't a checkbox list of controls that if you do all these things, you're secure. We all know, you know that better than anybody. Just because you make a bunch of checkboxes on a list doesn't mean that you're secure.
Absolutely. And just because you have a certification doesn't mean you're secure, right? Although those attestation report is a point in time, they're not continuous monitoring with the auditors. This has been a really great conversation. I'm pretty sure we're going to have to evolve this to a part two, three, four, and five. There's just so much to talk about with AI. Before we wrap up AI, what are some key risks that you're seeing with AI other than the data piece? What about the software creation piece?
This has been a big week in the software world, right? There's 2 reasons. One of them, everybody's probably not everybody. A lot of people have heard of is when Anthropic came out and said they built a model called Mythos that can find basically any vulnerability in any piece of software in a matter of minutes, right? And that it's so powerful they're not going to release it to the world because they think it. First, whenever you say that, we don't know, but it sounds good. And I actually do believe we are at the point where AI can find vulnerabilities in software that used to take months, researchers months, are now going to happen. So that so now you're basically starting with an assumption that every software has a potential
Well,
breach.
I want to stop you for a little bit right there. I think that we should set the baseline to say that like everything in the CVE is not every vulnerability that
Oh
is
yeah.
out there. There are only a small percentage that are reported to the CVE to Mitri. I think that these 0 day like vulnerabilities that people find are only as good as what's being reported that we know about. And so when a tool independently scans for vulnerability at that speed, there could be a lot of false positive as well. And there could also be the scope. Like, are you really looking at the right vulnerability to a company that is where it needs to be protected? I've seen a lot of tools out there that are doing these honeypots at external websites, but not really product. So I think in order to get product-based vulnerability, we need to need to make sure that we're looking at the right things.
Okay, in fact, I think our entire market's about to change in terms of if you look at a software development company, I think we're heading to a world with very few programmers and lots of testers and evaluators and governance people, right? I have, you know, as I said, I've been in the business a long time. I hadn't written code in a while. I have probably, using Claude and other tools, I've probably written 10,000 lines of code in the last 4 to 5 months, right? And if I'm doing that, I'm sure we know everybody's doing that. So the speed of development just went through the roof. So traditional SDLC, software development lifecycle stuff just kind of went away, right? That you can't do it because it's just too fast. So we now need to assume that the software is number one, vulnerable, but number two, it's going to change a lot faster than we're used to. We're not going to have patch Tuesdays anymore here soon. We're going to have patch noon, right? Every day at noon, we're going to get software. So the world's is getting so much faster, and we have to figure out how do we protect ourselves. By the way, and I say protect not just from being breached, but protect from software that performs poorly, software or, you know, as somebody likes to say, there's two great threats to any software, the attackers and stupid people who do dumb things, right? Those that people are going to be given new features and capabilities every, couple of days. So their training that, is all going to be completely different. So our speed of activity is going to get so fast that those types of things are going to become harder and harder to defend against.
I've always kind of separate out the difference between SDLC process for an IT team that is supporting a financial business that is not a technology company versus an SDLC process that is a technology company like Google. They're constantly releasing by the minutes, and then no one will ever feel the downtime, right? Whereas if you're in banking and you're processing money transaction, you're not going to be releasing change to production during peak hours when money is transacting.
Yeah, by the way, that's a great point because the world we've kind of, as you just described it exactly, is that most organizations, they may have a tech team that integrates new products and capabilities. They're not building their own code, but I think we're moving to a world where that code build is going to get closer and closer to that production environment, which is a risk factor that goes much higher. I actually think that that's the only way to defend as well. If we're constantly being attacked by new things, then we have to build new things just as fast as the attackers building new things. So I just think that's the world we're heading to.
Technology is moving so fast, we no longer can have lag time adopting technology and being out in production. So I noticed that just the difference between last year and this year in terms of what's available in the AI world, tool set wise, has changed so drastically. And so, moving forward, what are a couple of advice you have for a cybersecurity team? What should they be spending the money on in terms of their cybersecurity program and budget?
Yeah, I think, and this will not be a popular opinion, but I think if it's a major company right now, I would be out looking. I'm going to call it a cybersecurity strategy for, it's not the CISO, right? CISO's got a job. He's got to run what is currently there. You need a new person in your organization who understands where all this stuff is going, and it's not and it's very tied to the business. So you almost like a new person. I actually asked at a conference once. I said, if somebody was called jailbreaks a model, if somebody makes a model do something wrong, it's pure data. It's not networks and not devices. Is that even the CISO's job? And everybody at the stage who were all CISOs, they all said no, right? That's a data problem. That's not a device or network problem, right? And I think we have to start looking at organizationally who is, back to your point on data, but in point of operational, what is our strategy for protecting ourselves from both as a business and and our infrastructure, and can I get people who understand where this world's going and can lead me there? That's the investment I think people make. And the one thing I would tell everybody not to do, again, not a popular opinion, you're not going to tool yourself. You're not going to buy tools out of this problem. I know RSA just happened, and there were thousands and thousands of vendors who will tell you that they have the next great agentic AI tool. You're not just going to buy a product to solve this problem. It's not happening.
It's a strategy problem, it's a governance problem, and I think what we're really heading to is talking about trust. Who is this new chief trust officer or whatever title, and what does that org look like? I think we're moving away from information security to trust security. So, thank you so much, Chip. I think this is a great conversation, and I can't wait to have more with you. I know that things are changing really fast, so I'm really excited about where things are going. It's a great time to be in cybersecurity, don't you think?
It is. It's a great time to be in technology in general.
Yeah, definitely.
Fascinating time.
That was Chip Block, and this conversation clearly went far beyond one topic. One key takeaway: the future of risk management is less about counting controls and more about validating data, aligning to business outcomes, and adapting faster. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a colleague thinking about AI, cybersecurity, or enterprise risk. Thanks for listening to All About Risk. Until next time.